Before the flood ever came, before giants roamed the earth, before mankind had ever heard the name of a single angel, there was a night, unlike any other, on the summit of Mount Hermon, where the air grows thin and starlight feels close enough to touch 200 heavenly beings stood in silence. They weren't demons, not yet. They were the Watchers, divine radiant entrusted to guard humanity from afar. But that night they made a choice that would shake the foundations of heaven. They looked down not with contempt, but with longing. Longing to help, to touch, to teach, and for some to take. And in that moment, an oath was made. They would descend, they would cross the line. And with that one decision, they fell not by force, not by accident, but by desire. Among them was one named Sariel. He wasn't the loudest, he wasn't the first to speak, but he was there. And yet, his story didn't end in darkness. While the rest were bound beneath the mountains in chains of fire, while the Nephilim, the monstrous children of their union, ravaged the earth, Sariel's path diverged. He descended, but did not corrupt. He broke, but then repented. And in a decision so rare it appears nowhere else in all of Scripture or tradition, God forgave him. That's not just a story, it's a spiritual paradox. Because everything we've been taught says that when angels fall, there's no going back, no second chance, no restoration. And yet, it happened. According to ancient Jewish texts, like the book of Enoch, Sariel was one of the 7 archangels, a guardian of divine mysteries and of human souls. And his tale, buried beneath centuries of silence, is the only known account of a fallen angel restored to glory. Not because he was innocent, but because he repented. So here's the question you won't hear in Sunday school. If God could forgive a rebel angel, what could that mean for you? Because if grace reached that far, maybe it can reach you too. If you're ready to uncover the parts of the Bible they never talk about, but that just might change everything, make sure you subscribe, and share this message. And stay with me, because Sariel's story doesn't just rewrite what we think we know about angels. It might just reawaken what we thought was lost in ourselves. Let's begin before the flood, before the judgment, when heaven first looked down and the Watchers made their choice. The Watchers' rebellion, when heaven came down. It began with a gaze. The book of Genesis chapter 6 tells us that the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they took them as wives. Simple words, yet behind them lies one of the most mysterious and devastating events in the spiritual history of the world. These sons of God, according to early Jewish tradition in the book of Enoch, were not mere kings or powerful men. They were angels, watchers, divinely appointed guardians, tasked with observing the unfolding of human life without interfering. They were sent to protect the order of creation, not alter it. But on Mount Hermon, under the cover of a starlit sky, 200 of these beings made a different choice. They looked down and saw not only beauty, but vulnerability. They saw pain, hunger, fear, confusion. And they convinced themselves that their knowledge could help, that their power could save. Some did it out of pride, others out of pity. Still others, seduced by forbidden desire, simply craved what was not theirs to take. The decision wasn't impulsive. It was planned. A deliberate, united rebellion. On that mountain, they swore an oath. If one fell, they would all fall together. This was more than a breach of divine protocol. It was a cosmic rupture. The heavens had drawn a boundary, and they crossed it. They did not fall because they were tricked. They fell because they chose to. And in that moment, the earth became a battleground, not of men versus men, but of heaven's order against celestial ambition. And the consequences would echo through every generation. But amid that gathering of glory turned pride, one angel stood differently. His name was Sariel. And though he stood among the rebels, something in his posture, something in his silence marked him for another path. Before that path could be seen, however, a question had to be answered. Was he a bystander? Or something else entirely? Sariel's choice, witness or rebel? In the ancient scrolls, Sariel is named among the archangels. Enoch refers to him as one of the 7 holy ones who stand before the throne of God. Tradition holds that he was assigned sacred duties, the guardian of lunar cycles, and the watcher over human souls, the unseen currents of conscience memory and spiritual sensitivity. He was not a warrior like Michael or a herald like Gabriel. His power was quieter, more reflective, tethered to time and wisdom. When the watchers began to whisper among themselves, debating the suffering of mankind and whether their descent might bring relief, it's believed Sariel heard every word. He understood the yearning to help, but also the danger of stepping outside God's appointed time. He watched as Shemihaza, the most persuasive among them, rallied the others with bold promises and urgent logic. We could guide them, they said. We could protect them, and perhaps they could. But the question was never about ability. It was about obedience. Some traditions suggest Sariel was hesitant, not weak, but watchful. He felt the tug of compassion, the same ache that moved the others to act, but he also remembered the law angels were not to descend unless commanded. It wasn't cruelty. It was timing. Divine knowledge is like fire used. Too soon it burns. And Sariel knew the line between help and harm is often drawn by who chooses to wait. And so when the oath was sworn, when the others pledged rebellion in unison, Sariel remained still. But he didn't walk away either. In that moment, his quiet presence in the eye of the storm would become the turning point of his eternity. What does it mean to stand in the middle of temptation, to feel both love and fear, to wrestle not just with others' expectations, but with the burden of your own heart? Sariel didn't answer with words. He answered with restraint. And that restraint would carry him into the next chapter, a descent into a world unraveling, where his role would not be to dominate or to flee, but to witness and to endure. Let's follow him there. The descent, a fall that wasn't complete. When the oath was sealed on Mount Hermon, the heavens trembled. What followed wasn't a metaphorical fall, it was real. A celestial descent that looked from earth like a rain of living stars. Across the skies, blazing forms streaked downward, divine light breaking into flesh. The ground shook. The air thinned. Humans unaware of the cosmic laws just shattered ran toward the mountaintop in awe, not fear. To them it must have looked like salvation had arrived. And among the radiant figures standing at the summit was Sariel. He had descended. That much is clear. Whether driven by duty compassion or an ache he didn't fully understand, Sariel crossed the veil and stepped onto the dust of earth. But something was different. While others immediately began imparting knowledge, teaching metallurgy, sorcery, astrology, the carving of weapons and enchantments, Sariel remained on the fringes. He watched. He mourned. He walked among the people not as a god, not as a ruler, but as a quiet observer. While his brothers gave humanity tools to dominate and destroy, Sariel seemed to offer only insight, a whisper, a warning. Some suggest he taught the people how to mark the rhythm of the moon, how to sow in season and reap in peace. But he did not corrupt. He did not take. He did not cross the final line. Still, the corruption around him spread like wildfire. The Nephilim were born giant hybrids, fierce and unnatural, neither truly angel nor human. With their strength came terror. With their intellect came control. Cities fell to them. Tribes bowed in fear. Blood stained the soil, and the innocent Sariel, once admired in humanity, began to slip away. And yet he did not flee. He remained eyes fixed not on the chaos, but on the heavens above. His feet were on earth, but his heart somehow remained anchored beyond the veil. And in the silence of his grief, he wept not only for what his brothers had done, but for what he hadn't stopped. Have you ever found yourself in a moment where everything around you is falling apart? And even though you didn't cause the collapse, you feel the weight of it anyway. Sariel stood in that moment, surrounded by the noise of rebellion, but held by a stillness that was not his own. That stillness would soon be shattered, because heaven was watching, and judgment was on its way. The judgment of heaven, chains of light and a silent plea. It came suddenly like a silence too thick to be natural. The skies above Mount Hermon cracked not with thunder, but with the sound of justice. The wind stilled. The birds stopped singing. Even the insects disappeared. And then a light descended, not warm like the moon Sariel once guarded, but piercing, radiant, impossible to hide from. The archangels had arrived. Michael, commander of the heavenly armies. Gabriel, the voice of divine decree. Raphael, the healer of what had been broken. Uriel, the fire of judgment. They did not speak. They acted. The watchers were seized not with violence, but with power. Not one could resist. Some screamed, insisting their intentions were pure. Others fought pride still boiling in their blood. But Sariel did not lift his voice. He did not resist. He did not run. He simply knelt. Then came the courtroom, not like any earthly court, but a throne room of infinite size. The very stars burned along its walls. The floor shimmered like glass. And at its center, the throne of the Creator, the place where justice and mercy are not ideas, but living presence. The judgment was swift, the sentence final. Every angel who had descended without permission was to be bound in chains, buried beneath the earth until the day of final reckoning. Their connection to the divine would be severed, their names erased from heaven's song. And one by one they were dragged away, wrapped in chains not of iron, but of divine light that scorched their spirits and silenced their communion with God. Sariel felt the chain wrap around him. But it wasn't the pain that struck him, it was the silence. That deep, soul-crushing silence where the presence of God used to be. And it was in that unbearable quiet, surrounded by judgment, that Sariel did something no other angel had done. He whispered, "I am sorry," not out of fear, not to escape, but because his heart broke. For the humans he couldn't protect, for the knowledge misused, for the line he had stood too close to for too long. Tradition tells us that heaven had never heard those words from a fallen angel before. What happens when one voice dares to repent in the middle of judgment? What happens when heaven listens? We're about to find out the miracle of mercy, when God did the unthinkable. No one expected what happened next. Not the other angels. Not even Sariel himself. As the chains bound him and the other watchers were cast into the deep, into a prison of shadow and silence, where no light could follow, Sariel remained still. His whisper of repentance did not shake the throne room. It didn't echo through the heavens. but it reached the one who sits upon the throne. And that was enough. In the vast silence of eternity, something shifted. The judgment halted, not for all, but for one. Sariel was summoned again before the Creator. And this time there was no thunder, no wrath, only a question spoken not in anger, but in perfect truth. Do you know why you are here? Sariel bowed so low his forehead touched the glass-like floor. No, Lord, he said, only that you have called and I am here. Then came the words that would rewrite his destiny and reshape what we thought we knew about grace. I have seen your heart in the darkness. You grieved not for your place, but for your sin. You sought not your own glory, but my mercy. There was a pause so deep, it felt as though creation itself held its breath. Then the verdict, rise, Sariel. Your chains are broken. I am sending you again. God didn't deny that Sariel had crossed a line. He didn't ignore the fall, but he saw the heart and chose to restore it. And in doing so, he did what many believed was impossible. He forgave a fallen angel. But this wasn't just a pardon, it was a transformation. Sariel would not return to the same role. He wasn't sent back to the heights of glory to stand above others. No, his new mission was one of humility and compassion. He would become a guide to the broken, a healer to the hurting, a silent companion to the lost. Some traditions say this was the moment Sariel became an angel of healing, working alongside Raphael. Others say he returned to the moon not to reveal its secrets, but to guard its rhythm as a symbol of quiet faithfulness. Whatever the title, one truth stood above them all. Sariel was no longer just a watcher. He was now a witness to mercy. Can you imagine what the other angels must have felt? The awe, the confusion, the hope. Because if even one of the fallen could return, what did that say about the power of repentance? That question still hangs in the air. But Sariel didn't stay to debate it. He had work to do. The silent return, redemption in the shadows. This time there was no fiery descent, no blazing form falling from the sky. When Sariel returned to earth, it wasn't as a star, he came like a shadow. Quiet, unseen, a traveler with no home walking among villages where people had forgotten the songs of heaven. He didn't perform miracles in the public square. He didn't declare himself an angel. He didn't try to reclaim lost glory. He came to serve. In one village, he found a child burning with fever. A woman knelt beside her son, trembling hands, offering drops of water from a cracked clay cup. Sariel saw it all. He knew the plants that could heal. He had once taught such things in a time of rebellion. But now he did something different. He knelt and prayed. His hand rested on the boy's forehead, not as a divine healer, but as a servant. And with a whisper that only heaven could hear, he asked for mercy, not power. The child's breathing steadied. Color returned to his cheeks. The woman, stunned, looked into Sariel's eyes and asked, "Who are you?" He only said, "A friend." And before she could thank him, he was gone, disappearing into the dust of the street. This became his way. Sariel walked from village to village, not as a figure of awe, but as a presence of quiet restoration. He helped rebuild broken roofs. He carried water. He left firewood in the cold. He whispered courage into the minds of those who were ready to give up. Sometimes he spoke through dreams. Sometimes through a gentle nudge no one could explain. But always he remained unseen, and always he refused to take glory for himself. He once taught humanity knowledge too heavy for them to carry. Now he reminded them of the wisdom they'd forgotten. Simple kindness, trust, prayer timing. Things that were never forbidden, but often ignored. The world didn't know his name. And that was exactly how he wanted it. Because for Sariel, restoration didn't mean reclaiming status. It meant reflecting a light that wasn't his own. Just like the moon he once watched, he now lived not by shining on his own, but by reflecting the mercy of the one who forgave him. But even mercy isn't the end of the story. Because Sariel's journey would soon lead to a final test, one that would call him not to speak, not to teach, but to lay everything on the line for one flickering soul. And what happened there would echo back to the throne. The final test. A child, a village, a fire. Far to the north, in a land cloaked in winter and silence, there lay a village that had forgotten the name of God. There were no prayers at night, no kindness between neighbors, only fear, suspicion, and survival. It was the kind of place where light seemed to die before it reached the ground, where hope had been buried beneath cold earth and colder hearts. But there was one exception. A girl, 8 years old, orphaned, cared for by strangers who offered food but no affection. Each night she knelt beside her simple wooden bed and whispered a prayer, not loud, not polished, just honest. God, if you hear me, please send someone, and heaven listened. Sariel was sent not in glory, not with wings unfurled, but as a quiet traveler wrapped in furs, his face weathered like the hills, his eyes calm like deep waters. He entered the village with no announcement. He simply helped. He repaired a broken roof, hauled water from the frozen river, left bundles of firewood at doors during the night. At first the people were suspicious, then curious, then quietly thankful. But it was the girl he watched most closely. He became her friend, not with grand words, but with presence. He told her stories, not sermons or sermons in disguise, but tales that hinted at truth. Stories of light returning after darkness, of small kindnesses that changed whole cities, of unseen guardians who walk beside the brokenhearted. Her faith began to grow, and something unexpected began to happen. It spread. One neighbor shared a meal. Another offered help with the animals. A cracked smile, a soft laugh. Like frost melting under spring sun, the village began to thaw, not because of miracles, but because one child believed and one angel believed in her. Then came the fire. It started in a hut near the edge, an overturned lamp, a gust of wind. Within minutes, flames tore through wood and straw. Smoke blackened the sky. Panic erupted. The villagers screamed, ran. But one voice was missing. The girl. She was trapped inside. Without hesitation, Sariel ran into the fire. The heat was blistering, the smoke suffocating. He found her curled in a corner, coughing, eyes wide with terror. He wrapped his cloak around her, lifted her in his arms, and walked through the flames, as if the fire itself parted to let them pass. Outside, the villagers stood frozen as he emerged, clothes-scorched face covered in ash. He laid her gently in the snow, and she looked up into his eyes. "You're an angel," she whispered. Sariel didn't deny it, but he didn't affirm it either. He only smiled faintly and said, "No, I'm just someone God forgave." And then he vanished into the smoke, into the wind, into the story that would never be forgotten by those who saw it. One soul had been preserved, one village awakened, one fire had revealed the heart of redemption. And in that moment, the voice came again. Not thunder, not flame, just a whisper. It is finished, legacy and mystery, what Sariel means today. When Sariel felt the pull this time, it wasn't the downward drag of judgment, it was the upward draw of home. He had been faithful in small things. He had guarded not with power, but with love. And when he opened his eyes again, he stood not on snow, but on glass that shimmered beneath the throne of God. The halls of heaven were not quiet. They were filled with light celebration, not of victory, but of return. Sariel took his place not among the condemned, but among the redeemed. And yet, his mission wasn't over. According to ancient tradition, Sariel was appointed one of the 7 holy angels, those who stand before the throne, and also walk among the broken. His new assignment wasn't to command, it was to accompany, to serve as guardian of the repentant, a guide for souls still hovering at the edge. He doesn't come with trumpet blasts or wings of flame. He moves like moonlight over water, gentle, steady, almost unnoticed. But his presence is real. Have you ever felt a tug to turn back when no one else could see your struggle? A quiet nudge to forgive, to pray, to rise again after falling. Some believe that's where Sariel walks, in the space between regret and restoration, between silence and surrender. He is not a judge. He is a witness. He does not accuse. He reminds, not of your guilt, but of what could be restored. And perhaps that's why his story matters now more than ever. Because we live in a world full of noise, pride, shame, rebellion, despair. But Sariel's story doesn't shout. It whispers. It tells us that even in a sea of compromise, even surrounded by corruption, one can choose differently. One can return. And if he could, so can you. Some stories don't end with fanfare. They end with a whisper, one that lingers in the heart long after the telling. Sariel's journey is one of those stories, not because he was the mightiest or most glorious, but because he chose something rare. In a world where pride brought angels to ruin, he chose to bow. Where others hardened, he broke. Where rebellion echoed, he whispered, "I'm sorry," and God heard. What makes Sariel's redemption so powerful is not that he was perfect, it's that he turned. He didn't avoid the fall. He turned back from it. And in that single act, we see the mercy of God in its most mysterious form, not a reward for the flawless, but restoration for the surrendered. That's what grace does. It doesn't erase the past, it transforms it. It takes a moment of failure and weaves it into a future of meaning. And maybe that's the question this story leaves us with. What if the path back to God isn't blocked by your mistakes, but waiting for your return? Maybe you've carried something for years, a regret, a silence, a distance you didn't know how to cross. Maybe you felt disqualified, forgotten, beyond repair. But Sariel's story says otherwise. It says that even a fallen angel, one who stood at the edge of judgment, can still be met by the light of mercy. And if there's hope for him, there is hope for you. Thank you for walking this sacred path with me. If this story stirred something in your heart, I invite you to like, share, and subscribe, not just to support the channel, but to help others find their way back too. Someone you know may need to hear that it's not too late. And as always, may grace meet you in the silence, mercy guide you in the shadows, and truth draw you home. Until next time, may you walk with wonder, and never forget that even heaven makes room for those who turn back.